Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address this meeting. For me, the opportunity to speak on a topic that is important for all of us, currently the focus of my reflections, the question of the subject, namely this question concerned with the social and historical subject. As we all know, the multiple crisis today is somewhat culminating in the debate on environmental issues. In several Western countries, especially young people go to the streets and, well, many people would say use violence and provoke violent reactions. It is about protesters fixing themselves to the streets, blocking traffic, entering arts galleries, and doing more or less harmful things to the paintings and other artifacts. Just asking for attention, not for themselves, but for the topic of urgent action to save the planet from destruction. Of course, it is easy to say that this is wrong. In a legal perspective, it is. And it is equally obviously wrong to answer these activities with violence. In the extreme case, drivers accelerating their cars in order to hurt protesters, feeling obliged to accept the right to protest and expression of opinions, and at the same time securing the smooth functioning of the society and its economy. That is what the state is about. However, it seems to be not reaching far enough to discuss this topic in the perspective of 2 or 3 actors. The seriously concerned protesters concerned with the future of the planet, the seriously concerned men of the street concerned with securing the living standard for many, nothing that can be taken for granted, and the seriously concerned state being concerned with international competitiveness and a peaceful development and functioning of society. It had been emphasized for centuries and in different ways that human beings are political animals. We find this argument in the ancient Western philosophy in different forms maintained and restated. And we find the same argument in Eastern philosophy, for instance, in the ancient Chinese emphasis of the importance of striving for good, meaning striving for good in and for society. And underlying or not, accepted or denied, there had been always as well an implicit reference to nature. This formulation already being biased in an anthropocentric view, accepting the Cartesian distinction between subject and object. It had been on the one hand, the human being as subject, characterized by the famous dictum cogito ergo sum. On the other hand, we see the object. While not clearly defined, one may say it is everything that is not human. It is often forgotten that Descartes did not only insist that the human subject is constituted by thinking, he equally emphasized the role of doubt, extending the formula to dubito ergo cogito ergo sum. However, bottom line is that the Cartesian thinking is, in some respect, denying the subject role of humans, reducing it, following the establishment of the zeitgeist on the functioning within the individualist or utilitarian way of thinking and approaching reality. So not the social human being as subject. Karl Marx had been child of his time criticizing this approach. With his critique of the political economy, he had been at the same time caught in the framework which he characterized in the beginning of Capital Volume 1, saying that the wealth of those societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities, its unit being a single commodity. He emphasized even within this framework that human labor is strictly determined by being a matter of metabolism with the external nature, thus allowing him to see that human labor, as life in general, is characterized by relationality, seeing the human beings can only be understood as being themselves part and parcel of nature. This allows and demands to extend the Cartesian formula and emphasizing that it is not only the thinking and doubting, but also the acting on the basis of thinking and doubting. The ability to act is not limited to humans, but characterizes all existence. Obviously, the ability then to think and doubt makes a difference, opens ways to freedom as insight into necessities. Of course, the materialist approach embedded in the bourgeois zeitgeist made it difficult to overcome the limitations. This is not least also linked to the fact that Marx was trained as a lawyer. In this sense, he had been as well and not least used to the idea that the subject is characterized by the following. It must be capable of having rights and duties under the law. It must be able to act in its own name. It must be able to sue and be sued in court. And finally, it must be able to be held liable for its actions. So, on the one hand, reflecting the capitalist formation, even he criticized the same, we must see a limitation in Marx's approach, justifying the exploitation of nature. On the other hand, however, he had been well aware of humans depending on nature being in fact subordinated. Now, taking it as a socio-biological approach, we can now also reintegrate the famous statement that it is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. At a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into difficulty with the existing relations of production, or this merely expresses the same thing in legal terms, with the property relations within the framework of which they have operated hitherto. From forms of development of the productive forces, these relations turn into their fetters. Then begins an era of social revolution. The changes in the economic foundation lead sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. So that's Marx from the contribution to the critique of political economy. As important as today's social and environmental movements are, we should not overlook that we must recognize the change of objective conditions standing at the core of any development. These allow for and demand a new balance. It is the balance between a comfortable living standard and responsible treatment of nature, which we must understand as a new stage and form of metabolism. And I'm hesitating to speak of treating nature while arguing from a Marxist perspective. Well, we should not try to ignore the fact that in Marx's understanding, nature had been an object. We must recognize that this had been very much result of an incomplete Western Enlightenment. It had been primarily a matter of the emancipation of the bourgeoisie directed against the feudal classes. The proletariat served as auxiliary power, while the emancipation of this class remained limited, confined by individualism and consumption, however, always subordinated under the requirements of capitalist accumulation. Slowly but surely, and in contradictory movements, the proletariat developed from a class in itself to a class for itself. On the one hand, this process had been about tightening the screws of integration. Marx says there is no just wage as long as the wage system exists. And at the same time, the laborer is free in the twofold sense, thus depending on wage work. On the other hand, it had been about the emergence of the worker and working class as subject, here meaning as subject on equal terms with the bourgeoisie and the bourgeois. Of course, this must be taken with caution. The inequality of power continued to exist and exists today. However, now we are talking about inequality of power, where the actors are at least moving within the same framework, using the same language. We are talking about money as general medium of the economy and as time as general framework. As Marx emphasized, ultimately all economy is a matter of economy of time. Consequently, we must look further into the different forms of capitalism, each determining its own way the subject role of the worker. It also means that we have to develop an understanding of the capitalist process of production and its ambiguity. Looking at capitalism today, we can only see an anthropocentric and Eurocentric, Western-centric orientation. In consequence, we are confronted with extremely high costs. They occur in non-Western countries, by and large forced to accept the terms and conditions set by multinational and transnational corporations. Extremely high costs are as well occurring as a matter of environmental destruction. In the long run, both are undermining the further development of economic and societal progress. At the same time, we are witnessing new developments. Countries as China, or projects as international corporations of the BRICS countries and the New Silk Road, are claiming to be subject of historical processes, claiming to be accepted on equal terms. At the same time, we are witnessing that non-human nature and the environment claim to be accepted as more than a passive item on the agenda, only recognized as factor of effective and efficient exploitation. Decisive is that the claims are now firmly established by using the same language as the ancient system, meaning capitalism up to now or up to recently. Looking at nature, it remains true that it is not and cannot be a subject in the traditional understanding of jurisprudence. However, the interpretation of socio-economic developments in the light of an extended understanding of the theory of regulation allows the interpretation of today's protests in a different light, going beyond emotional dismay and intellectual considerations. It is a criticism giving voice to nature, making nature speak with the voice of the system itself. So looking from this perspective at the protests, the weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticisms by weapons. Material force must be overthrown by material force. But theory also becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses. Theory is capable of gripping the masses as soon as it demonstrates ad hominem. And it demonstrates ad hominem as soon as it becomes radical. To be radical is to grasp the root of the matter. But for men, the root is man himself. Contribution to Hegel's critique of Hegel's philosophy of law. Now, with this, we gained a lot. A new understanding of the socio-historical subject, but we gained even more. The major task of revisiting the relations of production in this light, considering thoroughly the elements of production and the different dimensions of a regulationist perspective. This then allows to develop a new take on nature and giving nature a voice. Thank you for allowing me to take the floor.